Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Now today I wanted to continue talking about crafting with fossils. And today I wanted to break down one of the other common fossils, but not one that's as cheap as a bound fossil that discussed in the last video, link in the description below. And this time I wanted to talk about prismatic fossils. Prismatic fossils are actually more common than bound fossils, but they remain more in demand. There's more uses for them, and as a result there's always quite a lot of demand for them. And just like in the bound fossil video, I want to go through the mechanics of how they work exactly first, and then go through each of the mods that they add, what the merits are of those mods, and whether or not you should try to craft for them. So firstly, the mechanics. They have two effects. Firstly, they function as a weighted chaos or alchemy orb, and they also add new mods, sometimes desirable, sometimes underwhelming, and sometimes awful, into the mod pool. You aren't guaranteed to get one of these new mods, unlike the ultra rare fossils like the glyphic fossils, which always will give you one corrupted essence modifier. You may receive no prismatic fossil exclusive mods, you may receive 2 on items that can roll 2. Or of course you can roll none. Now firstly, there is no chance at all with a prismatic fossil of rolling bleed or poison mods. These are generally undesirable anyway, except on niche builds. Now in Path of Exile with crafting, can't trumps can. So if you were to use a prismatic fossil in conjunction with a corroded fossil, which gives you more bleeding and more poison modifiers, the prismatic fossil will win out and you will not receive any of the poison or bleed modifiers, even though you've got something else making them much more common than they otherwise would be. Now secondly, there's some information that's listed on the Path of Exile wiki that I can't verify this independently, but I'm going to accept that it is true. And that is that using this fossil multiplies the spawn weights of all modifiers with bleed tags by 0, poison tags by 0, I've said that already, elemental tags by 10, fire tags by 5, cold by 5, and lightning tags by 5. The game internally keeps track of which mods are fire themed, which mods are cold themed, which mods are elemental themed, and while that information is not made available to players, if you bring up the PoEDB data mining site, it will list all of the mods. So this is the amulet page, and this will list all of the mods that can roll on an amulet and what tags they have. So for instance, you can see here that increased spell damage, its only tag is caster, whereas increased elemental damage with attack skills has attack and elemental as its tags. This information, you can generally eyeball what it's going to be, but I would always check it out if you're not sure. Especially with things like, for instance, there are mods that on some of the Elder and Shaper items that will grant you a specific herald or something like that. And whilst you will think that a skill that grants level 22 Herald of Ash, you will think that that is a fire and caster tagged thing. It's actually only fire. So always just check it out. So even though it's granting a spell, it's not a caster tagged thing. So always check that out at PoEDB, if in doubt. Now the first use case of prismatic fossils is crafting meh gear, i.e. stepping stone gear, super early in a new league. This is for solo self-found only. If you're in a trade league, you should sell your prismatic fossils and to other players and trade with them and get better gear for yourself. That will be cheaper than using prismatic fossils, but if you're in solo self-found, that's not an option. You're going to need to get resist gear from somewhere. Now, one of the things that prismatic fossils do, they bias towards getting resists. Every resist is tagged with fire, cold, lightning, with the exception of this one, which is chaos, or for all elements, is tagged with elemental. And so this means that you have a good chance of getting any individual resist, is much more likely to roll on an item that's been hit with a prismatic fossil than it is to roll on an item that's been hit with a chaos or an alchemy orb. And not only does it bias you towards getting one of them, it biases you to getting 2 of them at once, because if it makes, say, cold resistance more common and it makes lightning resistance more common, it makes the combination of getting both of them at the same time considerably more common. As a result, if you're just looking to craft very basic endgame gear to just get started in solo self-found, you could do worse than sticking prismatic fossils into single socket resonators and just throwing them on the highest item level pieces of jewelry that you can find, don't necessarily have a specific slot in mind, just use the slot that you've got the weakest equipment in. So in my private league that I've been playing at the moment, until very recently I was using just a magic leather belt for a whole period. I think it had pretty good life roll and a pretty good lightning resist roll, but nothing else on it. Had I not found better, I could have found a leather belt or a Stygian vice or something like that, and smashed it with a prismatic fossil and had a pretty good chance of getting something that had a reasonable suite of resists on it to get me started into endgame. Of course, you could get lucky and you could roll something great. Put these on your best bases. So, for instance, early on in the gearing up for maps process, your best bases that are available to you will probably be 2 stone rings. You might have gotten 2-tone boots by this point. If you do, they're great. But otherwise, you can just use whatever. Just don't use terrible bases like coral amulets. The second thing that prismatic fossils do is they add a whole suite of new mods. And I'll bring those up on the Path of Exile wiki to have a quick look at them. And if you have a look through, I'm going to go through all of them. But some of these are more desirable than others. So I want to go through each item slot and discuss its new mods first, and then how I'd craft with prismatic fossils on them. So first up, I'm going to skip the weapon one first. I'll come back to weapons soon. I want to talk about a lot of slots actually for prismatic fossils. You'll see here shields, body armors, helmets, gloves, and boots all have the option of getting 20 to 30% reduced elemental ailment duration on you. Now I want to start by saying that this stat is very weak unless you can get it up to 100%. At that point it becomes compelling, but you will need 4 items to be crafted with prismatic fossils in order to get there. So if you're a character that's not using a shield, that means you're going to need your body armor, your helmet, your gloves, and your boot to all be crafted with this mod. At that point, you're basically immune to elemental ailments unless they're linked to bad shit on the ground. So you can still be set on fire by burning ground, you can still be shocked indirectly by shocked ground, but enemies can't hit you with a freeze. They can't hit you with a chill. And that's pretty strong. However, I feel the opportunity cost of this mod is too high. For that reason, the only situation in which I recommend using prismatic fossils on these slots is when you're really desperate to roll resistances and you're willing to tolerate that you're going to wind up, some of your suffixes are going to be filled with this pretty mediocre mod. And in general, that's not going to be the case in trade leagues at all. I don't feel that there's any good reason to use prismatic fossils on those slots for most people. Your situation may vary. Second, we're going to talk about weapons. Now, firstly, there is a prefix named Local Attack Reduce Enemy Elemental Resistance that says attacks with this weapon penetrate 16 to 20% elemental resistances. Now, this one's interesting. This is a considerably higher tier roll than you can get via other means. So for instance, the crafted version of this mod caps out at about 15 or 16%. But firstly, it does not help spells, it's limited to attacks, and secondly, it is only with that one weapon. So if you have it on both weapons, it'll only affect each individual weapon. The problem with this mod is that it's a prefix, and any weapon that is trying to do elemental damage is like the opportunity cost of locking up one of your prefixes on this elemental penetration roll is too high to justify this in most situations. I feel that whilst this mod will help you, and if you can't get better, by all means use it, I think you'll find that you would be better placed using something else instead. Now, there is also another possible roll that you can get on weapons that is a little bit more juicy, and that is the subterranean prefix 40 to 60% increased elemental damage on one-handers and 80 to 120% increased elemental damage on two-handers. This is better. This is not an absolutely outstanding mod, but it's still pretty damn strong, and it's something that you will consider using. However, What I think is